I'm Estelle, 64 years old, and the expression on my son's face when he first saw my new $5 million villa in Westchester County was absolutely priceless. Just 6 months earlier, his wife Tiffany had mocked my tiny rented apartment, laughing that I'd die poor and alone. Now, as William declared their plans to raise children in my new home, I simply smiled and dialed my lawyer. Let me know where you're watching from today and hit that subscribe button. Sometimes life gives you the perfect opportunity to teach those who underestimate you a valuable lesson. Richard and I shared 40 beautiful years together before cancer took him away. We met during our sophomore year at Cornell University. He was studying engineering, and I was pursuing an education degree. It was a classic story of love at first sight. Richard often joked that he knew I was the one the moment I corrected his physics homework in the library. After graduation, we settled in a charming suburb of New York, buying a modest colonial home that we gradually transformed into our dream house. Richard built a successful career as a mechanical engineer for an aerospace company, while I taught 4th grade at Lincoln Elementary. Our life wasn't extravagant, but it was comfortable and filled with love. Our greatest joy came when our son William was born after 5 years of marriage. He was a bright, curious child who inherited Richard's analytical mind and, unfortunately, my stubborn streak. We raised him with values of hard work and compassion, sending him to good schools and supporting his interest in computers from an early age. The three of us had wonderful traditions: Sunday pancake breakfasts, summer camping trips in the Adirondacks, and elaborate Christmas celebrations where Richard would spend weeks planning the perfect gift surprises. Our home on Maple Avenue became the gathering place for neighborhood children, William's friends, and family celebrations. By the time William graduated from Carnegie Mellon with a computer science degree, Richard and I had been in our home for 35 years. We'd paid off most of the mortgage, renovated the kitchen twice, added a sunroom, and created countless memories within those walls. It was more than a house. It was the physical embodiment of our life together. William quickly landed a prestigious job at a tech company in Manhattan. He was making 6 figures by 25 and bought a sleek condo in a trendy neighborhood. Richard and I couldn't have been prouder. Our son had every advantage we never had, and he was making the most of it. Then Richard started coughing. At first, we dismissed it as a stubborn cold or seasonal allergies. When he began losing weight rapidly, I insisted on a doctor's visit. The diagnosis came like a thunderbolt on a clear day: stage 3 lung cancer. Richard, who had never smoked a day in his life, had less than 5 years. "We'll fight this," I promised him, holding his hand in the doctor's office as tears streamed down both our faces. "Whatever it takes." And fight we did. For 3 grueling years, our lives revolved around chemotherapy sessions, radiation treatments, experimental drug trials, and endless doctor appointments. I took early retirement from teaching to become Richard's full-time caregiver. Our savings, once earmarked for a comfortable retirement traveling the country in an RV, dwindled rapidly. Cancer treatment in America is ruinously expensive, even with insurance. Each new treatment brought new bills. The copays, deductibles, and uncovered treatments quickly depleted our carefully built nest egg. We refinanced our nearly paid-off house to cover a particularly promising clinical trial in Houston. During this difficult period, William met Tiffany at a work function. She was a marketing executive for a luxury fashion brand, tall, blonde, impeccably dressed, and 15 years younger than William. From the first time he brought her to dinner, I sensed something calculating behind her perfect smile, but Richard urged me to give her a chance. "Will's happy," he reminded me. "That's what matters." Their relationship progressed rapidly, and within 8 months, William proposed with a diamond ring that cost more than my annual teaching salary. They planned an extravagant wedding at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan, complete with 500 guests, a 10-piece orchestra, and a honeymoon in the Maldives. As Richard's condition deteriorated, William and Tiffany agreed to move up the wedding so his father could attend. I was grateful for this consideration, but less pleased when they refused to simplify the event, despite knowing our financial struggles. When I gently suggested a smaller venue might be appropriate given the circumstances, Tiffany looked at me as if I'd suggested they get married in a barn. "This is our special day, Estelle," she said firmly. "We only plan to do this once, and we want it perfect." Richard mustered all his remaining strength to attend the wedding, looking gaunt but handsome in his tuxedo. He delivered a touching father of the groom speech that left no dry eye in the ballroom. It would be his last major public appearance. 3 weeks later, my beloved husband of 40 years slipped away peacefully in our bedroom, holding my hand and telling me he'd wait for me on the other side. William flew back from his honeymoon for the funeral, staying just long enough for the service before returning to work, leaving me alone in a house that suddenly felt too big and too empty. As I sorted through Richard's papers in the following weeks, the full extent of our financial situation became clear. The medical bills had decimated our savings. The house had a new mortgage that would take 20 more years to pay off. Richard's life insurance policy had been cashed in to pay for treatments. After 40 years of careful planning and responsible living, I was virtually penniless at 63 years old. The realization that I couldn't afford to keep our home hit me like a physical blow. Each month, the mortgage payment consumed most of my small teacher's pension. Property taxes in our affluent neighborhood had skyrocketed over the years. The house needed a new roof, the furnace was failing, and maintaining the large yard was beyond my physical capabilities. After weeks of denial and tears, I finally called William to explain my situation. I needed to sell the house and find somewhere more affordable to live. His response left me cold. "I figured this might happen," he said, his voice businesslike. Dad's treatments weren't exactly economical. There was no offer of help, no suggestion that I might stay with them temporarily, not even much sympathy. Instead, William immediately pivoted to his solution. "There's a decent senior living facility near us. Tiffany and I drove past it last weekend. You should look into that. It's probably better than throwing money away on rent." When I explained I couldn't afford even a modest senior community, the conversation grew more uncomfortable. "Well, you'll have the proceeds from the house," William said impatiently. "Just be smart with it this time." The implication that Richard and I had somehow mismanaged our money rather than spending it keeping him alive was a knife to my heart. The house sold quickly, but after paying off the mortgage and outstanding medical bills, I walked away with just $87,000, far less than I'd hoped. With my small pension and Social Security, I calculated I could survive about 10 years before running out of money, completely assuming no major health issues of my own. I found a one-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood 20 miles from my former home. The building was run down, but relatively clean. My unit had water stains on the ceiling, outdated appliances, and thin walls through which I could hear my neighbors arguing at all hours. The rent consumed nearly half my monthly income. Moving day was heartbreaking. 4 decades of memories had to be condensed into a 700-square-foot apartment. I sold most of our furniture, keeping only Richard's favorite reading chair, our bed, and a few cherished pieces. Many treasured possessions went to consignment shops or charity. William took a few childhood mementos, but showed no interest in family heirlooms or photos. My new life was a stark adjustment. The hot water was unreliable. The elevator broke down frequently, forcing me to climb 4 flights of stairs with groceries. The laundry room in the basement flooded regularly. But it was what I could afford, and I was determined to make the best of it. A month after I moved in, William and Tiffany finally came to visit. Tiffany's nose wrinkled the moment she stepped through the door, her eyes scanning the small space with poorly disguised disgust. William looked uncomfortable, standing awkwardly in the middle of the room, as if afraid to touch anything. "It's cozy," he offered lamely. Tiffany was less diplomatic. As she inspected my tiny kitchenette, I clearly heard her whisper to William, "We can't let our children see their grandmother living in a chicken coop like this. What would people think?" During their brief 30-minute visit, Tiffany managed to comment on the interesting neighborhood, the vintage appliances, and asked if I felt safe living in this area. Each remark was designed to emphasize how far I had fallen from my previous life. As they prepared to leave, William awkwardly handed me a check for $500. "For anything you might need," he said, not meeting my eyes. I knew it was Tiffany's idea, not a genuine gesture of support, but a performative act of charity they could feel good about. Still, I swallowed my pride and thanked them. $500 would cover next month's utilities and groceries. To supplement my income, I found part-time work at the local library 3 days a week. The pay was minimal, but it got me out of the apartment and among books which I'd always loved. My coworkers were kind, and for a few hours each day I could forget my circumstances. That Christmas, William and Tiffany invited me to their home for dinner. Their 3-story brownstone was immaculately decorated like a magazine spread with a professional-looking tree and color-coordinated ornaments. I brought homemade cookies and a hand-knitted scarf for Tiffany that had taken me weeks to make. "How crafty," Tiffany said, setting the scarf aside without trying it on. My cookies were relegated to the kitchen, while store-bought pastries from an expensive bakery were displayed for their guests. Throughout the evening, I was treated more like hired help than family. Tiffany asked me to refill drinks and take coats, while introducing me to her friends as William's mother, rather than by name. When dinner was served, I was seated at the far end of the table away from William and the center of conversation. As I waited for a taxi home that night, clutching my coat in their elegant foyer, I overheard Tiffany speaking to William in the adjacent room. "Your mother needs to make more effort with her appearance. My friends were asking if she was okay. She looks so downtrodden. It reflects poorly on us." William's murmured response was inaudible, but he didn't defend me. The taxi couldn't come fast enough. Spring brought the news that Tiffany was pregnant. When William called to tell me I would be a grandmother, I felt a surge of joy despite everything. A grandchild represented new beginnings, a continuation of Richard's legacy. Perhaps this would be the turning point in my relationship with William and Tiffany. I immediately began setting aside a small portion of each paycheck to buy something special for the baby. Over several months, I managed to save enough for a beautiful silver rattle from a respected jewelry store. Not extravagant, but meaningful and lasting. When I presented it at their baby shower, Tiffany barely glanced at it before passing it to a friend. "We're not really doing silver for the baby," she explained to her friend loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's so old-fashioned and it tarnishes. Plus, who knows what metals are actually in these things? We're trying to be careful about toxins." The friend nodded sympathetically while I stood there, my thoughtful gift dismissed as potentially harmful junk. Later, when Tiffany was opening the mountain of expensive gifts from her friends, she announced, "We're so blessed to have friends with such excellent taste. The baby will have only the best." The implication was clear. My gift didn't qualify as the best. William sat beside Tiffany, smiling and saying nothing. As her pregnancy progressed, Tiffany began using the upcoming baby as a weapon against me. When I asked about visiting after the birth, she cited concerns about germs from public transportation that I would bring from my densely populated building. When I offered to help with childcare, she explained they were hiring a professional nanny with proper training in modern childcare techniques. Every offer I made was rebuffed. Every suggestion countered with a reason why I wasn't good enough to be involved in my grandchild's life. The incident at Tiffany's birthday dinner was when the pretense of respect finally shattered completely. William had invited me to join them and a few friends at an upscale restaurant. I spent nearly a week's grocery money on a new dress from a department store clearance rack, wanting to look presentable for the occasion. When I arrived at the restaurant, I immediately felt out of place among Tiffany's fashionable friends. My new dress was clearly inexpensive compared to their designer outfits. William greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek before returning his attention to Tiffany's friends. During dinner, Tiffany opened her gifts: expensive handbags, jewelry, and spa certificates. My gift was a framed photo of the sonogram she had sent me, placed in a silver frame I'd found at a second-hand shop, but polished until it gleamed. Tiffany unwrapped at last, her smile tightening as she saw what it was. "How sentimental," she said, setting it aside quickly. Then turning to her friend, she stage-whispered, "Thrift store chic isn't really my aesthetic." The table fell uncomfortably silent. I pretended to sip my water, blinking back tears. Later, as dessert was served, Tiffany became animated, discussing their plans to renovate their already perfect home to accommodate the baby. "We're converting the guest suite into a nursery," she explained. "The designer is charging a fortune, but only the best for our little one. Some people have to be practical their whole lives, but thankfully we can afford the very best." Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward me before she continued loud enough for everyone to hear. "I mean, look at Estelle. She ended up renting that awful little apartment. If you don't plan properly, you end up old, poor, and alone. Can you imagine? I told William she's probably going to die that way if she keeps living like this." The table fell silent again, but this time with shocked embarrassment. One of Tiffany's friends tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. William, rather than defending me, laughed awkwardly and turned the conversation to his recent promotion. I excused myself to the restroom, where I spent several minutes trying to compose myself. When I returned, the party was discussing vacation homes. I sat quietly for the remainder of the evening invisible, except when serving as the butt of another of Tiffany's concerned comments. On the subway ride back to my apartment, I felt something hardening within me. The hurt was still there, but beneath it, a sense of resolve was forming. I might be poor, I might be alone, but I still had my dignity. Somehow I would find a way to reclaim it. This determination was tested severely when 2 weeks later I received a text message from William. Tiffany was planning their baby's christening and felt it would be better for everyone if I didn't attend. My situation might make other guests uncomfortable, and they wanted the day to be perfect. I read the message 7 times, each reading more painful than the last. My own son was banning me from my grandchild's christening because his wife found me embarrassing. I turned off my phone, curled up in Richard's old chair, and for the first time since his death, felt utterly, completely alone. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in April. I was sorting donated books at the library when my supervisor mentioned someone was asking for me on the phone. Thinking it must be William with news about the baby, I was surprised to hear an unfamiliar male voice. "Mrs. Hamilton, my name is James Harrington from Harrington, Meyer and Associates. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Harold Peterson. I was wondering if we might schedule a meeting to discuss some matters relating to Mr. Peterson's will." The name Harold Peterson sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. When I hesitated, the lawyer continued, "Mr. Peterson was a close friend of your late husband, Richard. They attended Cornell together, I believe." The memory clicked into place. Harry Peterson had been Richard's roommate freshman year. They'd remained friends through college, but had largely lost touch afterward, except for Christmas cards and the occasional email. I recalled Richard mentioning that Harry had done well for himself in the tech industry. "I'm afraid there must be some mistake," I told the lawyer. "I barely knew Mr. Peterson. We weren't close." "Nevertheless, Mrs. Hamilton, Mr. Peterson has named you in his will. Would tomorrow at 2 o'clock be convenient? I can send a car if transportation is an issue." Curious and slightly concerned, I agreed to the meeting. The next day, a sleek black town car arrived at my apartment building, causing a stir among my neighbors. The driver, impeccably dressed in a suit and cap, opened the door for me with a respectful, "Mrs. Hamilton." The law offices of Harrington, Meyer and Associates occupied the 37th floor of a gleaming Manhattan skyscraper. I felt out of place in my simple clothes as I was ushered into a conference room with panoramic views of the city. James Harrington was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind expensive glasses. He greeted me warmly and offered coffee from what looked like a genuinely antique silver service. "Mrs. Hamilton, thank you for coming. I know this must seem unusual, but I assure you, everything will make sense shortly." He opened a leather portfolio and removed several documents. Harold Peterson passed away 6 weeks ago after a brief illness. He was 85 years old and had no immediate family. In his final years, he spent considerable time putting his affairs in order. I nodded, still confused about my presence there. "Mr. Peterson left an estate valued at approximately $300 million, Harrington continued, causing me to inhale sharply. "The bulk of this will go to various charitable foundations, his alma mater, and research institutions." He slid a document across the table toward me. "However, Mr. Peterson was very specific about a portion of his estate. He has left you, Mrs. Estelle Hamilton, the sum of $15 million to be transferred immediately and without conditions." I stared at the document, certain I'd misheard. 15 million. "Yes, Mrs. Hamilton, $15 million. Additionally, Mr. Peterson established a trust that will provide you with an annual income of $250,000 for the remainder of your life." My hands trembled as I tried to make sense of this information. "There must be some mistake. I hardly knew Harry. Richard was his friend, not me." James smiled kindly. "There's no mistake. Mr. Peterson left a letter explaining his decision. He handed me a sealed envelope. However, I can tell you that your husband Richard helped finance Mr. Peterson's first technology company back in 1979. It was a modest loan of $5,000, which Richard apparently never asked to have repaid. I remembered now. Richard had mentioned using some of our honeymoon savings to help a friend start a business. He'd called it betting on Harry's brain, and never expected anything to come of it. That company eventually became Petatech Industries, Harrington continued. It revolutionized early database systems and made Mr. Peterson a very wealthy man. He never forgot that your husband's generosity made it possible at a time when no bank would take a chance on him. Tears filled my eyes as I opened the letter with shaking hands. Dear Estelle, if you're reading this, I've finally kicked the bucket. About time, if you ask my doctors. You won't remember me well. We only met a handful of times over the years. But I never forgot Richard and what he did for me when we were young and broke. That $5,000 he loaned me was everything he had, and it changed my life. I've followed your family from afar through the years. I know about Richard's illness and passing. I know about the financial hardship his medical care caused. And I know that your son William hasn't stepped up as he should. Richard saved my life with his generosity. Let me return the favor. The enclosed funds are not charity. They're the long overdue repayment of a debt with proper interest. Richard invested in me, and now that investment has matured. Enjoy your life, Estelle. Buy something ridiculous. Travel. Donate to causes Richard would have supported. And maybe if he's earned it, help that son of yours understand what real family loyalty means. With gratitude. Harry. I read the letter 3 times, tears flowing freely. James Harrington sat patiently, occasionally sliding a tissue box closer to me. Is this real? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Entirely real, Mrs. Hamilton. The funds have already been transferred to accounts in your name. We've established everything with proper tax considerations. The $15 million is yours free and clear, as is the annual income from the trust. He slid several more documents toward me. Bank statements, account numbers, contact information for financial advisors. Mr. Peterson was very thorough. He wanted to ensure you would be well taken care of and that you would have appropriate guidance managing these assets. I stared at the numbers on the statements, unable to fully comprehend what had happened. Just yesterday, I had been counting pennies to afford bus fare. Today, I was a multimillionaire. I'd be happy to explain the details of the trust and recommend next steps, James offered. Or we can schedule a follow-up meeting if you need time to process this. I think I need some time, I admitted, still dazed. James nodded understandingly. Of course. When you're ready, my team and I are at your disposal. Mr. Peterson was a valued client for many years, and he asked that we extend the same level of service to you. As I prepared to leave, a thought occurred to me. Mr. Harrington, would it be possible to keep this matter private for now? I'd like time to consider how to proceed before anyone knows about this change in my circumstances. James smiled, a glint of understanding in his eyes. Absolutely, Mrs. Hamilton. Discretion is our specialty. This matter will remain strictly between us until you decide otherwise. The town car returned me to my apartment building, where I sat in Richard's old chair until dawn, alternately crying and laughing, as I read and reread the letter from Harry Peterson. Somewhere in those hours, a plan began to form in my mind. If life had given me an unexpected second chance, I intended to make the most of it, on my terms. The first thing I did with my newfound wealth was nothing at all. For 2 weeks, I continued my normal routine, working at the library, shopping at discount grocery stores, and living in my small apartment. I needed time to think, to plan, and most importantly, to ensure this miraculous change in fortune didn't change me at my core. During this period, I had several meetings with James Harrington and his team of financial advisors. They helped me understand my new financial situation and discussed investment strategies to preserve and grow my wealth. James, who had become not just my attorney, but something of a friend, advised caution. Take your time making major decisions, he counseled. Many people who come into sudden wealth make impulsive choices they later regret. I appreciated his wisdom, but after careful consideration, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. First was finding a new place to live. Not just any place, but a home that represented both comfort and a subtle statement. Working with a high-end real estate agent recommended by James Thess, I began viewing properties in Westchester County, coincidentally the same affluent suburb where William and Tiffany had recently purchased a home. After viewing nearly 20 properties, I found it, a stunning 6-bedroom villa on 3 acres with a pool gardens and views of the Hudson River. The property had been on the market for $4.5 million, but needed significant updates. I offered $4 million in cash with a quick closing, which the sellers immediately accepted. The purchase required barely a quarter of my new wealth. Next came the renovation. I hired Alexandra Winters, a renowned interior designer whose work I'd admired in magazines. When we first met, I was still dressing in my poor widow clothes, and I saw the momentary hesitation in her eyes, wondering if I could afford her services. That changed quickly when James Harrington called to arrange payment details. "I want this home to reflect who I am," I told Alexandra. "Not flashy or ostentatious, but beautiful, comfortable, and of unquestionable quality." For the next 3 months, crews of workers transformed the already lovely house into something truly spectacular. The kitchen was gutted and rebuilt with custom cabinetry, professional appliances, and marble countertops. Bathrooms were updated with heated floors and rainfall showers. The primary suite was redesigned to include a sitting area with a fireplace and views of the garden. Throughout the process, I took particular pleasure in selecting items that Tiffany had once mocked in her own home, decorating commentaries during my visits. The gauche wallpaper in powder rooms, the dated brass fixtures, the grandmotherly floral arrangements. Each choice was tasteful and elegant, a subtle rejection of my daughter-in-law's dismissive judgments. While the house was being transformed, I underwent a transformation of my own. A discreet stylist helped me update my wardrobe with classic, well-made pieces that flattered my figure. A skilled hairdresser shaped and colored my hair, taking years off my appearance. Regular appointments for facials and manicures became part of my routine. I joined a local country club, taking up golf and tennis lessons. My health improved dramatically with regular exercise and freedom from financial stress. New friendships formed easily in this setting, particularly with a group of widows who met weekly for lunch and bridge. I also reconnected with old friends from my teaching days, many of whom were surprised and delighted by my recovery from financial hardship. I was careful not to flaunt my new wealth, explaining simply that a family friend had left me a generous inheritance. To those closest to me, I confided the full truth, swearing them to secrecy. Throughout this period, I maintained minimal contact with William and Tiffany. They were busy with their newborn daughter, Emily, whom I'd only seen in photos texted by William. My invitations to visit had been repeatedly declined, with vague excuses about the baby's schedule and Tiffany's recovery. As my villa neared completion, I began planning a housewarming party. I joined the board of a local education foundation that provided scholarships to disadvantaged students, and my fellow board members, all influential community leaders, were among those invited. Conspicuously absent from the guest list were William and Tiffany. The evening of my housewarming party was magical. 60 guests wandered through the beautifully lit gardens and elegant rooms, enjoying catered food and live music from a string quartet. Several neighbors from my old apartment building were there, including my former supervisor from the library, all of them wide-eyed at the transformation in my circumstances. "Estelle, this is simply stunning," my friend Dorothy from my teaching days exclaimed. "You deserve every bit of this happiness." The party made the local society pages complete with photos of me and my new home, surrounded by my new friends. I made sure to get extra copies of the newspaper. As I settled into my new life, I found joy in simple pleasures that had once been unattainable. Fresh flowers delivered weekly premium coffee beans, books purchased new rather than borrowed from the library. I began traveling, taking a river cruise through Europe and a 2-week tour of Japan. Most satisfying was my philanthropic work. In Richard's memory, I established a fund for cancer patients struggling with medical bills. I volunteered teaching reading to elementary school children. I donated to the library that had employed me during my darkest days. All the while, I waited for the society pages and local gossip to bring news of my changed circumstances to William and Tiffany. It took nearly 2 months, but the inevitable finally happened. The coincidental meeting occurred at Le Bernardin, an exclusive French restaurant in Manhattan. I was dining with James Harrington and two other members of the Education Foundation board when I spotted William across the dining room entertaining clients. Our eyes met briefly before his widened in shock, taking in my designer dress, sophisticated hairstyle, and the obvious luxury of my dining companions. Later, as I was leaving, William intercepted me near the coat check. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with confusion. How are you here?" I smiled pleasantly. "Hello, William. Lovely to see you. I was just having dinner with friends. How are Tiffany and little Emily?" Before he could respond, James appeared at my elbow. "Estelle, our car is waiting. Are you ready?" William stared at James, then back at me. "Mom, what's going on? Who is this?" "James Harrington, my attorney," I replied casually. "James, this is my son William." James shook William's hand firmly. "A pleasure. Estelle speaks of you occasionally." The subtle emphasis on occasionally was not lost on William, whose confusion only deepened. "I should be going," I said pleasantly. "Perhaps we can catch up properly another time." I left William standing in the restaurant lobby, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning realization that something significant had changed. The phone call came the next morning. William's voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. "Mom, I've been thinking maybe it's time we caught up. It's been a while and Emily is getting bigger. Tiffany and I would love to see you." I maintained an even tone. "That would be nice. I've moved recently. Why don't you come to my new place this Sunday afternoon?" "You moved where to?" William sounded surprised. "Westchester, actually. Not far from you. I'll text you the address." There was a long pause. "Westchester? How are you affording Westchester?" "We can discuss that when you visit," I replied. "Shall we say 2 o'clock Sunday?" Sunday arrived with perfect early summer weather. I had arranged for fresh flowers throughout the house and prepared a light tea service in the garden. At precisely 2 o'clock, the gate intercom buzzed, and I watched on the security monitor as William's luxury SUV pulled into the circular driveway. The expressions on William and Tiffany's faces as they took in the grand villa were priceless. Tiffany clutched baby Emily to her chest, her jaw literally dropping as they approached the front door. William looked as though he might be experiencing some sort of medical event, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and disbelief. I greeted them at the door myself, dressed in a casual but clearly expensive linen outfit. "Welcome," I said warmly. "Please come in." They stepped into the soaring entry hall with its crystal chandelier and sweeping staircase, both seemingly struck speechless. I led them through to the back terrace where tea was set up overlooking the pool and manicured gardens. "Your home is unexpected," William finally managed. "Mom, what's going on? How can you possibly afford this?" Tiffany's shock had quickly transformed into calculation, her eyes assessing the furnishings and decor with new interest. "It's quite simple," I replied, pouring tea into bone china cups. "A dear friend of your father's passed away and left me a substantial inheritance. Harold Peterson, you wouldn't have known him." "How substantial?" William asked bluntly. "Substantial enough for me to live very comfortably for the rest of my life," I answered, deliberately vague. "Would you like to see the rest of the house?" The tour that followed was illuminating. With each room we entered, each more beautiful than the last, Tiffany's demeanor toward me shifted. The woman who had once mocked my threadbare clothes now complimented my exquisite taste. The same woman who had excluded me from my granddaughter's life was now suggesting weekly family dinners. As we stood in the spacious gourmet kitchen, Tiffany handed Emily to me for the first time. "She should get to know her grandmother," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. William, meanwhile, had moved from shock to something resembling opportunistic excitement. As we returned to the terrace, he placed an arm around my shoulders, a gesture of affection I couldn't recall him offering in years. "Mom, this is amazing. I'm so happy for you. Dad would have loved this place." I agreed that Richard would indeed have loved it, though I doubted William's sudden enthusiasm for family connection. As we finished our tea, William cleared his throat. "You know, Mom, Tiffany and I have been thinking about expanding our family soon. With 2 children, our current place will start to feel cramped." Tiffany jumped in eagerly. This house would be perfect for children, Estelle. All this space, the pool, the beautiful grounds. Emily would have the most wonderful childhood here, and any siblings would too. I sipped my tea calmly. I'm sure they would. It seems almost wasteful for just one person, William continued. All these bedrooms empty, and you know how expensive childcare is these days. If we were all under one roof, it would be so much more practical. Finally, William laid his cards on the table. This would be the perfect family home for all of us. Tiffany will love raising our kids here. The presumption was breathtaking. After years of neglect and outright cruelty, they simply assumed they could move into my new life and claim it as their own. I set down my teacup carefully. That's an interesting thought, I said mildly, reaching for my phone. Would you excuse me for just a moment? I need to make a quick call. I dialed James Harrington's number, putting the call on speaker. James, it's Estelle. Sorry to bother you on a Sunday, but my son and his wife are here, and I think it might be helpful if you joined us. Can you come over? James, who lived nearby and understood exactly what this call meant, agreed immediately. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Estelle. I turned back to William and Tiffany with a pleasant smile. James will be joining us shortly. While we wait, perhaps you'd like to tell me more about how you envision this arrangement working, the one where you move into my home. William had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but Tiffany was already in full planning mode. We could take the east wing. Those bedrooms have the best light for children. Of course, we'd want to redecorate somewhat, but the bones of the place are perfect. And you'd have company and help as you get older. I nodded thoughtfully. How considerate. And may I ask what happened to your concerns about my, what was it, dying poor and alone? Wasn't that what you said at your birthday dinner, Tiffany? The color drained from Tiffany's face. I never... That was a misunderstanding. Was it? And when you told William it would be better if I didn't attend Emily's christening because my situation might make guests uncomfortable, was that a misunderstanding too? William shifted uncomfortably. Mom, that was a complicated time. Tiffany was under a lot of stress with the new baby. I see. And what about the time you both visited my apartment and Tiffany whispered, not quietly enough, that it was a chicken coop and you couldn't let your children see their grandmother living that way? Was that stress too? Before they could respond, the doorbell rang. James Harrington entered elegant, even in casual Sunday attire. I made introductions, then got straight to the point. James, William, and Tiffany were just expressing interest in moving into my home to raise their children. I thought you might explain the provisions of my will and trust to them. James nodded, understanding perfectly. Of course, Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton Estelle has recently updated her estate plans. While I can't disclose specific amounts, I can tell you that the bulk of her substantial estate is designated for the Richard Hamilton Memorial Foundation, which provides assistance to cancer patients and their families struggling with medical debt. Tiffany's face fell visibly. William looked stunned. Additionally, James continued, Estelle has established a trust for her granddaughter Emily's education. The trust is structured to provide funds directly to accredited educational institutions, not to parents or guardians. And what about the house? William asked, his voice tight. James looked to me for permission to continue. I nodded. The house will transfer to a charitable organization upon Estelle's passing, to be used as a retreat for teachers and educational researchers. There is no provision for family inheritance beyond Emily's educational trust. The silence that followed was deafening. Tiffany's face had transformed from calculated friendliness to barely concealed rage. William looked as though someone had slapped him. "You're cutting us out completely," he finally managed. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes directly. "No, William. I'm ensuring that my assets go to causes that reflect my values and Richard's legacy. I'm also making sure that my home remains mine for as long as I live, not a commodity to be claimed by people who showed no interest in my welfare when I had nothing to offer them." Tiffany stood abruptly. "We should go. Emily needs her nap." "Of course," I replied calmly. "Please feel free to visit again. My door is always open to my son and granddaughter. I simply wanted to be clear about boundaries and expectations." As they gathered their things to leave, I touched William's arm gently. "Despite everything, you are still my son, and I love you. When you're ready to have a relationship that isn't based on what I can give you materially, I'll be here." The look he gave me was complex: anger, embarrassment, and perhaps a flicker of shame. They left quickly, Tiffany not even bothering with goodbye pleasantries. As their car disappeared down the driveway, James placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "That went about as expected." I nodded, feeling a mixture of sadness and resolve. "It needed to happen. Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Anytime, Estelle. For what it's worth, I think you handled that perfectly." That evening, I sat alone on my terrace watching the sunset reflect on my pool. The confrontation had been painful, but necessary. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt completely in control of my life and my future. If reconciliation with William was possible, it would have to be on new terms based on mutual respect rather than financial advantage. In the weeks following the confrontation, William made several attempts to contact me. His first messages were angry and accusatory, claiming I had changed and was punishing him unfairly. I read these without responding, recognizing the wounded entitlement behind them. Gradually, his tone shifted. The texts and voicemails became more reflective occasionally, including photos of Emily. I responded to these with warmth, but maintained my boundaries. When he asked to meet, I suggested a neutral location, a cafe in town, rather than either of our homes. 6 weeks after our confrontation, we sat across from each other at a small table, the awkwardness between us palpable. William looked tired with dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders I hadn't noticed before. "You look well, Mom," he said after our coffees arrived. "Really well." "Thank you. I feel well. How are you, William, truly?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Honestly, not great. Tiffany and I have been struggling. Your situation has brought up a lot of issues between us." I waited, letting him continue at his own pace. "When you were living in that apartment, it was easy for Tiffany to dismiss you, to see you as a burden or an embarrassment. I'm ashamed to admit I went along with it. But now," he gestured vaguely, "now you don't need anything from us. You're actually more successful than we are. It's forced me to confront some ugly truths about our relationship." "Which truths?" I asked quietly. "That I abandoned you when you needed me most. That I let Tiffany dictate how I treated my own mother. That I've become someone Dad would be ashamed of." His voice cracked on the last words. I reached across the table to touch his hand. "Your father loved you unconditionally. So do I." "But you must be so angry with me," he said, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "The things we said, the way we treated you." I was hurt, I acknowledged, deeply hurt. But anger doesn't serve me anymore. I've chosen to focus on creating a life that brings me joy. "I don't know how to fix this," William admitted. "Tiffany is furious about the will situation. She feels entitled to your money, though she'd never say it that way." "You can't fix your wife's feelings or expectations," I told him gently. "You can only decide what kind of son, husband, and father you want to be." Our conversation continued for nearly 2 hours. For the first time in years, William really talked to me about his career pressures, his concerns about Emily's future, the growing distance between him and Tiffany. I mostly listened, offering perspective when asked. As we prepared to leave, William asked hesitantly, "Would it be okay if I brought Emily to visit sometimes without Tiffany?" "I would love that," I replied sincerely. "My door is always open to you both." The following Saturday, William arrived with Emily, who was now crawling and babbling. I had prepared a special area in the sunroom with soft toys and books. Watching my son interact tenderly with his daughter began healing something broken between us. These visits became regular a few hours each weekend when William would bring Emily to Grandma's house. Sometimes we would swim in the pool, other times explore the gardens or bake cookies in my gourmet kitchen. Tiffany never accompanied them, maintaining her distance and disapproval. During this period, my friendship with James Harrington deepened. What began as a professional relationship evolved into regular dinners, theater outings, and eventually something more romantic. At 64, I found myself experiencing a kind of courtship I'd never expected to have again after Richard. James was kind, intelligent, and refreshingly straightforward. He made me laugh and challenged me intellectually. When he first kissed me after a concert at Tanglewood, it felt both startling and entirely natural. "Is this okay?" he asked, ever the gentleman. "I've wanted to do that for months." "More than okay," I assured him, surprising myself with how true it was. My life expanded in other ways, too. I traveled extensively: a safari in Tanzania, a month in Provence, a cruise to Alaska. I took classes in French cooking, watercolor painting, and digital photography. I mentored young teachers through a program at my old school district. 9 months after our confrontation, William called with news. "Tiffany and I are separating," he said without preamble. "I've moved out. I'm staying at a friend's place until I figure things out." The separation became a divorce, with a custody arrangement giving William Emily 3 days each week. During his parenting time, they often stayed in my guest suite, Emily delighting in her special room at Grandma's, with its canopy bed and window seat overlooking the garden. Freed from Tiffany's influence, William began a process of genuine self-reflection and change. He apologized properly for his past behavior, not just in words, but in consistent actions that demonstrated respect and consideration. For my 65th birthday, I hosted a garden party at the villa. Among the 50 guests were my friends from the country club, fellow board members from the foundation, my old colleagues from the library and school, and even a few neighbors from my former apartment building who had shown me kindness during my darkest days. William was there with Emily now, a precocious toddler who charmed everyone she met. James was by my side, our relationship now openly acknowledged. As I looked around at this gathering of people who genuinely cared for me, not for my money or what I could provide, but for who I was, I felt a sense of peace and fulfillment that transcended material wealth. After the guests had gone, William helped me bring the last of the glasses into the kitchen. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, giving me a heartfelt hug. "I'm so proud to be your son." "Even without the inheritance," I teased gently. He smiled now, able to laugh at his former self. "Especially without the inheritance. The best thing that ever happened to me was you cutting me off. It forced me to recognize what really matters." Later that evening, sitting on the terrace with James, I reflected on the remarkable journey of the past 2 years. When Richard died, I thought my life was essentially over. I told James, my hand comfortably entwined with his. I couldn't imagine finding happiness again, especially after everything with William and Tiffany. James kissed my hand softly. "And now I know that life can surprise you at any age, that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to find love, to create joy." As the stars appeared above us, I thought about Harold Peterson and his unexpected gift. Not just the money, but the opportunity to reclaim my dignity and discover my own strength. I thought about Richard, who would have been so proud to see the woman I'd become in his absence. Most of all, I thought about the lesson I'd learned through it all, that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in self-respect, meaningful relationships, and the courage to create the life you deserve at any age. Has someone ever underestimated or dismissed you only to be surprised by your resilience? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. If this tale of second chances resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of late-blooming triumph. Don't forget to share with anyone who needs a reminder that it's never too late for a fresh start. Thank you for listening today, and remember, the most powerful statement you can make is living well on your own terms.